Alright, as promised, I wanted to go ahead and do an updated flame tier list now that FeiSe has been out for a while. And the reason why I'm doing this is because you mainly want to focus on one element. But I want to go ahead and disclaimer myself because you may find characters higher or lower on this tier list depending on your situation. But at the end of the day, this is my opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about the current playstyle of Flame, which I'm mainly basing my rankings off of. FeiSe is the newest Flame character and she is a support, meaning that you're mainly casting her skills so that way you can increase your Flame team's damage, and then doing a dodge attack once you have a lot of summons on the field, usually done by your main DPS. Because of these mechanics, FeiSe's teams are pretty restrictive, but we will discuss this later in the video. So let's go ahead and start this tier list off by talking about the standard characters, and the first one being King. And I'm gonna have to rate him as a C. So King's main focus is a Shatterer, and how he mainly does that is by activating his discharge. He can also use his skill, but it has a very long skill cooldown. But his shattering capabilities are conditional. They generally do more damage if he's able to break someone's shield, and he provides more DPS the more enemies that are on the field. So now let's go ahead and talk about his matrices, to where his 2-piece were actually pretty powerful at the start of the game, to where these were very good for shatter matrices. Generally you would use 2-piece Shiro and 2-piece King, but now Scylla matrices are in the game, which are more powerful than Shiro's. So now you use 2-piece Shiro and 2-piece Scylla for shatter matrices. His 4-piece is just not very good compared to other 4-pieces, so unfortunately these matrices are rated as a D. Bringing us to Huma, and I have to rate her as a D. She is a very good shatterer, but the main way that she shatters is by dodging, and now most teams are very dependent on their dodges. So now let's go ahead and take a look at her matrices, starting with her 2-piece effect, which were pretty good at the start of the game, especially when you combine them with Frigg and her multi-slash dodges, but nowadays there are just better 2-piece effects. Her 4-piece is not very good, but they are decent for tanks, so I have to rate these as a C. Bringing us to Zero, and I have to rate him as an S due to the fact that he's one of the greatest supports in the game, to where your healer is either going to have a Zero or Coco on the team. But Zero's discharge allows you and your teammates to be immune to damage for a couple of seconds, which can be very powerful when a boss is about to do a very powerful attack. On top of that, his discharge allows you to get max cubes and heal and shield your teammates. If you get him to 5-star, you're going to be able to produce orbs, which allow your team to do more damage and receive more healing. And 6-star just makes this more easier to do. Bringing us to his matrices, to where his 2-piece grants you a giant shield whenever you discharge to a weapon that they're equipped to. Which makes this very powerful is his 4-piece effect, to where if you have a shield active, it grants you and your teammates a very big damage buff. So I have to rate these matrices as an S. Bringing us to Cobalt, and I have to rank her as a C. The main reason being is that she just does not work unless she is 6-star. Now she is in the standard banner and you could purchase her with Black Go, but there's just better options like Claudia. Bringing us to her matrices, where her 2-piece effect is one of the strongest in the game, especially for your main DPS. The only problem is that you have to debuff your targets, which Flame constantly does. And her 4-piece is not bad since it allows you to have infinite dodges, which can be helpful for some teams, but there are usually better 4-pieces. But due to how valuable her 2-piece is, I have to rate these as an S. Bringing us to Ruby, and I have to rate her as a B. She can be either a main DPS or a Shatterer, but as a main DPS, the other ones are just stronger, and as a Shatterer, she takes up too much field time. So now let's go ahead and talk about her matrices, to where her 2-piece increases your flame attack after casting a skill, but sadly it does not work in the background. To where her 4-piece is very strong, but unfortunately it has a stacking mechanic, so if you switch off the weapon that has these matrices, you lose all the stacks. So I have to rate these as a B. Bringing us to Annabella, to where I'm going to have to rate her as an A. Now she is a very powerful main DPS, to where she can do as much damage as Liu Huo. But her biggest problem is that she does not synergize very well with FeiSe, by not producing any summons on the field, which greatly increases the Flame team's DPS, due to FeiSe's Lotus Petals. Bringing us to her matrices, which are really powerful. Her 2-piece increases the final damage and crit rate that these matrices are attached to, whereas the 4-piece increases the final damage even more, as well as crit damage, and gives the added benefit of restoring dodge attacks. These can be an alternative for DPS matrices and works extremely well for Annabella, so I have to rate these as an A. Bringing us to Lan, and I have to rate her as an A. If you can get her to A1, she greatly increases the shatter and DPS for your flame team. On top of that, her Paracells counts as summons, which synergizes very well with FeiSe. On top of that, she is an S tier tank, allowing any weapon skill to taunt enemies and granting damage reduction for the team. Bringing us to her matrices, where her 2-piece increases the flame attack and flame damage as long as you have one flame weapon on the team, to where her 4-piece increases the elemental damage and final damage depending on the weapons you have equipped on your team. But unfortunately, unfortunately, there are stronger limited matrices, so I have to rate these as an A. Bringing us to Liu Huo, and I have to rate her as an A. Now, Liu Huo is basically a requirement for main DPS when it comes to FeiSe, due to the fact that she's the only main DPS that has summons, which greatly increases FeiSe's power. The only problem is that Liu Huo is a close range character, so if you do not get her to A3, you might have trouble surviving if you don't have a healer on the team. Which brings us to her matrices, to where her 2-piece increases your final damage as well as her sparrow count, but even without these matrices, you generally don't have much issues with sparrow feathers. To where her 4-piece greatly increases her elemental damage, but it does slightly decrease over time. When comparing these to other Domain 9 matrices, these are pretty lackluster, to where in some teams these are even replaced with standard matrices. So I have to rate these as an A. Bringing us to FeiSe, and I have to rate her as an S. Even at 0-star, she does provide a big buff for the Flame team due to her clone, and if you can get her to 3-star, you can summon 2 clones. But even without that, when combined with Liu Huo, you can take advantage of the Lotus Petals, which greatly increases the Flame team's DPS due to the amount of summons on the field before dodge attacking. Which brings us to her matrices, where her 2-piece greatly increases your flame attack, while her 4-piece greatly increases your elemental damage as well as increase your final damage as long as she's on the team, which rivals the Liu Huo matrices. So I have to rate these as an S, but with dual elements being a thing, these may drop in rank sooner than we think. Bringing us to the support element altered, and the first one that we need to talk about is Lyn, and I'm going to rate her as a C, to where she does not bring much for the flame team and you really want to have her at 6-star to really bring out her damage, but I do not recommend you do that. Bringing us to her matrices, to where her 2-piece does increase your attack, but it does have a stacking mechanic. Whereas her 4-piece increases your final damage, but you have to have Lyn on the team and you have to be inside of her field. Due to all of these constraints, I'm going to have to rate these as a D. Bringing us to Fiona, and I'm going to have to rate her as a B. And this is due to multiple factors. The first being that if you want to truly take advantage of her, you need to have 1.6 million HP to fully use Wellspring. Next, Zeke is already a better support than her. And lastly, Nanine is going to be coming out very soon, making her the better alter. But if you are trying to heal, Fiona is an S tier due to all the buffs that she can bring for the team, especially if you can get her to 3-star, allowing you to execute your opponents at a higher HP threshold as long as you're in Benediction Resonance. And when it comes to her matrices, her 2-piece does grant you a lot of attack, but it may not be worth if it prevents you from getting a very powerful 4-piece. And her 4-piece greatly increases the final damage, but she has to be on the team. And currently, she's already being kicked off the Flame team, so I have to rate these matrices as a B. But if you are a healer, these matrices are really powerful to where they increase your teammates' final damage, to where I would have to rate these as an S. Bringing us to our last support, Zeke, to where I have to rate him as an S. Zeke just brings so much for the Flame team to where his skill greatly increases the flame damage. It also provides Serpent Chain for the main slot's weapon, which increases his damage by 30%, which is further increased to 50% if you have him at 6-star. And lastly, it provides Grievous for your team. Bringing us to his matrices, to where his 2-piece greatly increases the flame attack of the team, rivaling Lan's matrices. To where his 4-piece greatly increases the final damage, which rivals Fiona matrices. But with Zeke on the team, your flame attack increases even more. Due to this, I'm going to have to rate these matrices as an S. But here you can see all the rankings for the characters and matrices that I mentioned when it comes to Flame. But I'll try to do an updated tier list for each element so that way you can see how the new character affects the meta. But do you agree with my Flame tier list? Let me know down in the comments. But other than that, I'll talk with you guys later.